What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Some commentary for you. I've got Jimmy Smith here with me. We're going to go over what was UFC Fight Night 148 from Nashville, Tennessee, a card that had a highlight feature of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Pettis. Fight whole card to me in its entirety that I really was looking forward to. And I guess the first thing I want to ask you, Jimmy, outside of pay-per-views, you got to buy pay-per-views, so naturally going to be excited for it. Do you look at a card beforehand and determine mentally whether you think it's been a good card or a bad card?
Generally, yes. But one thing I tend to do is every now and then there are those cards that lack a lot of star power. And I generally like those simply because the guys on there are really fighting for a spot. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, this is my chance. I'm going hard for it. So those sleeper cards I look for. So I decide ahead of time whether or not I'm going to check out a card. But a lot of times it's based on criteria other than are there any big name fights on it? You know what I mean? So I don't necessarily judge the way everybody else judges.
Well, I was really excited about this card for a number of fights. But I will say, when I look back at it now as a whole, it really seemed to be kind of like a one-sided card. I mean, a lot of the fights went 30-27s. More than I think maybe generally I would think they do. But I also made it a point to go back and look and be like, what did the judges see of some of these fights? Because they seemed really one-sided. We'll start off here. Maycee Barber, J.J. Ulrich. Maycee Barber comes in. She's got 6 finishes now in 7 fights in a division we normally don't see that type of dominance in finishing. And I thought this was a great fight for Maycee Barber. She actually had an opponent do all the right things. She came in with experience. She came in, she pushed pace. J.J. Ulrich actually has a win over an opponent that missed weight. We'll talk about that in a moment because that's a big deal, in my opinion. Maycee did a really good job after she got put down for the first time in her career, I believe. She gets put down. She does a really good job at respecting that pressure. Aldrich continued to push the pace and be aggressive. And to me, it was almost one of those fights where it's a tale of 2 rounds. Like, I would love to hear Maycee Barber's corner, because when she came out in the second round, she did a great job at being physical, even though she was still going backwards. Elbows, body kicks. And it seemed like, to me, Aldrich just started to gas just a little bit. She started to lower her hands. And then Maycee just moved in 100% full throttle and just put an end to it.
I've said it many times before. Finishing is not a skill, it's an instinct. And Maycee Barber has that instinct. And as soon as she had Aldrich in any kind of trouble, she just completely swarmed her, attacked her, and finished her. And it's those instincts where I'll wait. It won't always go my way. I'm not trying to rush it. I'm not trying to get in the beginning. But as soon as I get you in that compromising position, your ass is done. And that's what I love about Maycee Barber is, it wasn't a great first round for her. Aldrich fought like a veteran in round number 1. But as soon as that opportunity presented itself, Maycee Barber never lets it get away. And I thought that was a fantastic performance by her against a veteran, kind of put her on the map. And like you said, her kind of finishing ability, extremely rare for this weight class. Extremely rare. You just don't see a whole lot of finishes. So great job for her. And I think great things coming for her.
Yeah, and a fighter that will give you no qualms about how great she is. I mean, she will tell you what she's going to do, and then she will go out and do it, and that's what we want to see in the UFC, right? Like, we've built that kind of mold of, Conor McGregor comes out, tells you what he's going to do, does it. Ronda Rousey for a long time, tells you what they're doing, comes out and does it. A lot of people will tell you what they're going to do, but it's another thing to see somebody come in, male, female, weight class, and different. For the most part, so far, very short career, small window here, but she's been one that will go out and tell you, hey, listen, her nickname is the future, right? She's going to tell you what she's going to do, and she did a great job against J.J. Ulrich, who really, I think right now, probably her biggest test to date. So the next fight to me, let me just say, these fights don't make a whole lot of sense, in my opinion. You've got Violent Bob Ross, and you've got Steven Peterson, Ocho, two of the better nicknames in MMA, right? Now, I saw Steven come out of Legacy FC. And I will tell you, in all honesty, even looking at where he is now, when he was coming out of Legacy and even into the Contender Series, I really thought he was going to be a good fighter. And he is a good fighter. I don't want to put it that way, but you talk about a guy that struggles with dimensional fighters. Pena comes down. He misses weight on this. He apologized, but I do think that played a big part in this fight. And to that point, we talked about J.J. Ulrich got that win before over a fighter that misses weight. It's a big deal. I don't think they make a big deal about it in the broadcast, but I think it should be brought up. I know there's a financial penalty, but at the same time, it impacts fights. I think Pena dominated clinches a lot here. And Peterson just does what he does. It's almost reminiscent of like a poor man's Justin Gaethje or Jason Knight that just left. You know, if he's going to hang in there, he's going to get beat up, and he doesn't seem to adapt. Like Brandon Davis did kind of the same thing about him, and maybe it's a corner issue that Steven has, but you have to have answers. Your answer can't just be absorbing punishment and swinging and hoping you can end it. It's not enough in the UFC to just keep brawling and hope you're going to get a KO, because it's not going to happen. The longer a fight goes, the less likely it is. That's why we really cherish those moments as they happen, which we'll talk about later too. But to me, you know, I don't know. You have two guys here that I think could really, really have good paths if laid out properly. And I know we're not matchmaking in like a wrestling sense, but I think when you look back at a fight like this, I don't think anybody really rises in the ranks or even falls or loses value in a fight like this. Do you agree?
Well, the thing for Pena is new weight class. Obviously, he missed weight, which is a big step backward for him. But it's basically his debut at the weight class. And I think more than the opponent, Steven Peterson, it was how does he perform at 145? Is there a future for him at 145? Did he look spectacular at 145? He didn't look great. Got past Steven Peterson. Steven Peterson is a classic, what I call GBND. Game but not dangerous. A tough dude. A strong guy. No gaping holes, but also not a threat necessarily in any particular position. Like all around pretty solid. He's game. He'll step in there and fight. He'll go to war, but there's nothing in his arsenal where if you're Luis Pena, you got to go, well, got to watch out for this. There's nothing in there. So that's exactly the kind of fight you want to see if Luis Pena is going to be a threat at 145. Give him a GBND. Give him a tough guy who's going to stand there with him, who's not going to fold, but probably isn't going to land that big shot to finish the fight. Doesn't have the slickest ground game in the world that will suddenly get that submission out of nowhere. He's a great measuring stick for where you are, and that's how this fight felt to me for Luis Pena. It was about where is Pena at 145, not necessarily a move up or down for him or for Peterson. It was about how does Pena look at 145. Now, not making weight, that sucks because it kind of negates that whole evaluation. How does he look at 145? Well, he wasn't at 145. So, but that's how this fight felt to me from the beginning.
I would agree that you do need to have those matchups, those tests. But at the same time, like you said, you lose so much value in those when you have somebody that doesn't make weight. And then to me, it was a decisive win. I mean, even on the scorecards, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Steven Peterson was more in there than he was. But it's hard for me to really put a whole lot of stock into what happened in that. And if your premise is, well, we're going to give him this test, and then he misses weight, to me, it almost hurts him more than anything else, right? Like now we have to see this play out over again. And now if you lose, well, now I'm going to look at this in a more negative light than I would have a positive light. For me, the next fight, you know, the flyweight division sometimes can get pretty stagnant to watch. And I think one thing I wanted to see on this broadcast specifically, because as we talked about last show, how does the UFC promote their product? You have a fighter now in Formiga who has a really sneaky resume, right? Like you look at this guy's resume. Ian McCall, John Dodson, Joseph Benavidez, Wilson Hayes, Cejudo, Borg, Sergio Pettis. And that's just if you're like a UFC guy. You know, Mamoru Yamaguchi, one of the most well-respected bantamweight fighters in the world he's fought against. So I was really interested to see how they were going to sell a background story in this 15-minute fight. And to me, it was a little bit too much too soon for Figueroa. His name, I'll never get it right, but it is what it is. I think he did a great job at sticking around in this fight. But to me, you know, Formiga's never lost with a takedown. And that's like a really, really impressive stat for me. It's also odd that afterwards he called out Cejudo. I know we talked a little bit. We don't do a whole lot of prep, but you told me you don't listen to the commentary, so you might not know this.
Generally, when I study, I mute it. If I'm studying a fight for some reason, I mute it just so I can focus better on the fight.
So he calls out Cejudo afterwards, but they'd already made the Benavidez fight. How does something like that happen? Like, how do you not? I mean, I get it. Like, maybe he's not totally up on MMA news that day, but how do you not have somebody in your position, in your corner, in your management come to you and say, hey, listen, you know, I know the idea was if you win, you're going to call it Henry Cejudo, but you might want to tone that down a little bit because he's going to get Joseph Benavidez now.
Yeah, I mean that's a really weird one. And also, I mean, the problem we have with the state of flyweight being up in the air. Juicy De Silva fought a great fight against a very tough Figueiredo, and where does he go? Sure, he can call out Cejudo and call out anybody. We don't know what's happening at 125, so that makes all of the contender fights, him versus Benavidez, anything you put on the floor. Where do they go? Is Cejudo moving up? I mean, is he fighting Moraes for 135-pound title? Is 125 going away? There are so many question marks that climbing the ladder to a destination you can't see takes something out of these. And I made the same point in the Moraes Rivera rematch when we didn't know what was going on at 135. Is TJ going to defend at 35? Is he going down to 25 again? Blah, blah, blah. You don't know what's going on. So it takes away from these contender fights. And it takes away from the fact that Juicy De Silva fought a great fight against Figueiredo. I thought it was fantastic. He did everything he needed to do. Great jiu-jitsu, takedown when he needed it. Excellent on the feet. He's a really dangerous guy at 125. But what does that mean when we don't know the future of the division? That's the hard part.
I guess to the point I was trying to make in the beginning, when you look at a guy that has a resume like he does, when he's fought the fighters that he's had, we're usually, like you said, we're building them up to something.
Right. Yeah.
We're laying a story and saying, look at the high level of athlete this guy has competed against and where he can go next, or where he's going to go after this, or what this fight puts in position to do. And I'm actually shocked. The flyweight division in itself has went past 2019. I thought we were done with this at the end of last year, but they continue to just kind of throw these fights in. And you're right. It's like, it's just there. Is it a filler fight? I don't know. But I would feel so much better about watching these fights. They obviously want to invest in them because they're putting them on the main card, right? This isn't buried on a Fight Pass prelim. Not that there was Fight Pass prelims here, but it's not, the opening fight.
Right.
So you're obviously putting them in a card to bring eyes to it. But it's so weird because we don't really know why we're watching what we're watching, and we're just hoping for a good fight. The next fight, to me, and on paper, I like to call these a Stalin brawl because you just have two guys that are prominently going to counter each other. And you have, and Makdessi, man, he's such a plotting guy, and I don't like when fighters do that. And in terms of Pereiro, and I'll butcher names left and right, and I have no shame in that. This guy, if you watch him, right, he's so kind of unconventional in how he fights, but he doesn't use that unconventionalness to bring a pressure, which is so weird to see. You have a guy like MVP, for example, that's unconventional, use it to bring pressure, you see how it works. And this, to me, is a fight that you were going to have that slow, laborious pace. You've got one guy that's bringing a real unconventional style. You've got another guy that's just willing to stand there and let that pressure come and react to it. And I will say, even knowing that coming in, this was the first fight where fans started to get vocal. And the whole fight, to me, just seemed like this really long feeling out process. And when we talk about fighters trying to get somewhere, I don't think this helps Makdessi at all, because this is kind of becoming his calling card, that he almost does just enough to win, but he will also only fight to the level that he's brought to. So his fight with Ross Pearson, sure, was a fight of the night. Sure, it looked great. But in my opinion, looking back at that now, Ross Pearson willed that out of him. He almost carried him on that fight.
Right.
And to me, that's a real problem when you look at fighters like that. If we're, in one sense, building fights and building promotions and building storylines, you have one fighter that's not willing to almost engage in that, whether it's fear of losing, whether it's fear of putting on a bad performance. But it's really hard for me to see them pushing someone like that. When we talk about a fight like not raising someone's stock, I mean, sure, you're going to get wins doing this, but you're not going to get wins that move you anywhere. And I can imagine, I guess I can't. It's hard for me to relate to that. So that was a poor thing to say. I don't think a lot of people understand how much goes into a fight camp. I would not want to be someone that devotes 3-4 months of my life entirely to a 15-minute fight, get in 5 minutes, and hear the crowd start booing. I can't imagine what that would do to your mindset, to your morale, because those fans are just voicing displeasure of a boring product, right? It's a boring fight. It's a stagnant fight. It's stale. But you put all that work to get into there. Why wouldn't you use that as motivation to continue and say, you know what, I'm gonna give you what you want to see, but I guess you can't because you're always afeared, that you're gonna lose.
the hard part from my position when I was doing commentary, when I was interviewing fighters, and the ones that are painfully aware of their deficiencies in that regard, that they don't have exciting fights, they're always telling you this one is going to be it. Behind the scenes, they're always saying, oh, this one, I'm going after this guy. And it's so rare that a fighter like that kind of, you know, a leopard changes their spots in that regard. It's conscious to a lot of fighters. They don't like the fact that they're known as being boring, that they get booed. They don't appreciate that. They don't like it. They say they're going to change, but it's so hard to get in there and get away from a style that has at least gotten you to the point where you're on main card UFC. So it's very difficult for fighters to break this pattern. Jesus Pinedo, I thought his funk would allow him to get in a little bit. He is a little bit unorthodox. He's a little bit trickier. I thought he could cut that angle and do something at some point against McDessie, who basically planted his flag in the middle of the octagon and stood there and waited and said, I'm going to take the center and make you come after me. And he did. He made the counter striker initiate, and it didn't work out well. But I'm telling you, from the point of view that I've seen it a million times, in terms of talking to fighters, it's always this one, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be exciting. And so infrequently do they. It's so infrequent that they actually turn that corner and do something different. It's hard to get away from a style you've established. Very difficult.
And who do you blame on that then? I mean, do you blame coaching? Do you blame preparation? Do you blame the fighter? Who makes that better, right? Like if we're going to sit here, you as a 20-year analyst, me as a more educated than normal fan, if we're going to sit here and point out this deficiency, who is the one that fixes it? Because I don't want to just say that it's him. There's tons of fighters that fall into this trap, right? It's not just him. It's noticeable here because of what we watched and the fact that before the fight, we're both kind of thinking the same thing. And what I don't want to do, and I guess what really hurts any sport for that matter, is when you can sit there and you know what's going to happen, right? It takes the desire for you to watch it out of the way. Think about it from like an NFL perspective. Like, I don't want to watch Patriot games. I know what's going to happen. Like, I've seen the story how many times? In that sense, at least you can watch it. You can watch Tom Brady with the healthy respect of you're seeing history, right? I'm going to see one of the best players ever. I'm sorry, I'm not getting that with John McDessie. I'm not sitting here and saying, well, this fight might not be the most exciting fight, but I'm watching one of the best fighters ever, so I'm going to put up with it anyway. When you're trying to make a face and a name for yourself in a sport that it's literally, what have you done for me lately? And you can be forgotten about within 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, the average fan may not remember 80% of this card. Would you say that's correct?
Very true. Very few big movers, very few water cooler moments, as I would say.
Right. So, I mean, who changes that? How do you change that mindset? It seems to me like that would be something that would be ingrained in you by this point in your career. And it's maybe a little bit too late to go in and try to change things up. But how does a fighter get there? How do you end up at this point?
Sometimes it's a corner thing. It's a training thing. But I've seen a lot of fighters go out there and do something. And I talked to the corner man, the coach, and like, dude, that's not what we trained at all. That is not what we worked on. He was a different guy in camp, but they tend to get back in these ruts. A lot of times it's what got you there in a sense, and you're afraid to let it go. You're afraid to let go of the thing that has gotten you this level of success. And also, if you're McDessie, are you really, man, if you and I get a title run, do you know you're that guy or not? Is it, hey, look, I'll stay in the middle, winning these kind of fights for as long as I can in my career? I'm not the second coming of Jose Aldo. That's not what I am. And so staying in the middle and winning fights and having this game plan and earning enough money to make a living, sometimes that's as good as it gets. But whether you blame him, ultimately it's the fighter. But I've seen a lot of cornermen tell me after a fight like that, we trained him to go after the guy and he didn't. We trained him to do this, and that, and that wasn't the game plan. And so you saw the shock with Tyron Woodley losing his title. His corner was like, "What the hell? This isn't you. This is not what we trained." So you can talk about the corner all you want. Ultimately, it's up to the fighter, but it's a combination of both to get a fighter out of that rut stylistically. It's a real chore, and it takes both the corner and the fighter being on the same page. It isn't easy.
Let's move on from that one to the Curtis Blades Justin Willis fight. And to me, You know, you talk about a trap fight, right? So we just saw Curtis Blades with kind of a devastating quick loss to Francis Ngannou. And I wanted to see how he was going to come out in this. Because conventional MMA fan thought process, right? You want to prove yourself again, right? You want to prove that chin. You want to come out. You've got a guy like Justin Willis. We're going to stand. We're going to exchange. And I give him all the credit in the world for not getting drawn into the firefight. Because truthfully, I think that's what Justin Willis would have wanted. And I don't want to take something away from Justin Willis because I think you can go back, anyone can go back and just watch, even in a short period of time, how much he's grown as a fighter. But the technical aspect was not there. He honestly, in this fight, I'm not sure if you watched the full card, but he was put in a position that Randa Marcos actually had used earlier that year, or earlier the actual fight card, excuse me, where he basically was just dominated by hand control. And he almost, you can tell by watching it, is just using his frame and size to get up. Not only does that not work against a technical fighter, but Blades actually slammed him like 3 times during the process of doing this. You can look at the two of them, right? And I don't want to take anything away again from Willis. He is a good fighter. But from an athletic standpoint, if I'm looking at him and I'm looking at Blades, Blades is the better athlete. And at one point, I will also say to a poor referee move, I'm not sure if you noticed this or not, but there was early in the second, Willis used the cage to to stop a takedown.
Yes.
Absolutely grabbed and clung to the cage. And the referee said something, but at that point, I think when it's that blatant where a fan watches it and I notice, maybe it's time to take a point for that, right?
I agree, or else give him bad position. No, that was going to take you down. We're starting you down, which you almost never see happen. But yeah, he took you down with that get down. He's on top. Or a point. So those are your two options. Because grabbing the cage is so incredibly effective. It really changes the outcome of certain positions, and you almost always. It's so rare that you lose a point for it. Usually, it's I let go of the fence and they slap your hand, and it stops the takedown. So it's one of those tricky, illegal moves that is almost always worth doing if you're that kind of a fighter. Almost always worth it. You won't lose a point, and it can really save your ass.
Literally, it will literally
save your ass. And it's another thing. Talking about the strategy and the athleticism, all these things. Justin Willis knew. Well, first off, to counter your point in the beginning about what kind of fight you want after a big loss, I think it's you get back to basics. Look, you need to right the ship here. You can't afford a knockout loss. Don't stand and bang with this guy. Stick to your wrestling. I don't care if the crowd is throwing garbage into the octagon. Stick to your wrestling. Take this dude down. Don't get hit. Don't take another step backward in a division where if you stay in the mix a little bit longer, you're in for a title shot. You aren't far out of there. You know what I'm saying? So you can't afford a step back. This is a please don't lose kind of fight. And that's how Curtis Blades fought. He stuck to his wrestling, great game plan, and took Willis down ad nauseum. If you're Willis, what I always wonder when I see a fight like this is, what were you training for? Because I didn't see anything particularly slick about Curtis Blades' takedown. He didn't do anything unorthodox. He didn't do anything I didn't expect him to do. And yet everything worked almost every time. It just makes me wonder what kind of fight you expected to run into against a wrestler like Curtis Blades. And Willis seemed totally unprepared for the takedown, totally unprepared for the ground game. And that surprised me a bit. It was like, what kind of guy do you think you were taking on here? Taking on a wrestler. Well, and yet he seemed unprepared for that game plan, which surprised me.
Even worse, if you listen to his pre-fight stuff, which I went back and listened to after watching that performance with a mindset of, what are you doing?
Right.
He literally was like, I train with the highest level guys there is. And I'm thinking like, okay, you may do that. You may train with those people. Why are you getting caught in hand fighting like this? Why are you getting tripped on basic, like, month 1 jiu-jitsu things? And to me, the other thing that really stood out, and you might not have listened to, well, first of all, there was also one of the worst Kimura attempts you'll see in a professional MMA event in that, and then gave his backup directly after attempting the horrible Kimura.
Right.
To me, when I watched this, I literally thought of 2 things. I thought of the time that Khabib, like, just smothered Barbosa, and I was like, this is on par with that. But when listening to the pre-fight things, Did you listen to them by chance? Did you listen to Willis's pre-fight
I
stuff?
did not.
Would it
I
surprise
did
you?
not.
Would it surprise you if I said he wants a super heavyweight division created in the UFC?
That would surprise me.
That he actually cuts weight from 270 to 280, and that he used to cut from 300, and he feels like there should be a super heavy division. This blew my mind. The fact that he was sitting there willing to say that and willing to be the first one to take that there and then put on a performance like that. Because that, it just wasn't.
If you're fighting for a new division, you better look great.
Yes.
You better look. If you're fighting I'm going to plant the flag in this new division, you better look fantastic.
Yeah. That was, if I had to put one word on that performance, I would say uninspired.
Yeah, definitely.
So at this point, as a fan, right? So if you and me can displace ourselves, we've paid $200. We've sat there for a significant amount of time. We've went through, Macy Barber getting what she wanted. With up to this point, one of the most exciting main card fights of the night. We've then seen, 4 straight decisions. We've just watched what we thought was going to be a knockout in 2 heavyweights that turned into just be a grappling show. Now we're going to get ready for the main event, if we're still awake, where Anthony Pettis is going to fight Stephen Thompson. And let me just say, this was Stephen Thompson's fight to lose in just about every single way. And Pettis is just not human, right? I mean, this guy fought, think about this. This guy fought at 45. If there was going to be a speed problem in his game, it was going to show up then. He goes to 55. Now he goes to 70. So he would have a power issue at 70, you would think, the same way he would have that speed issue at 45. Doesn't happen at all. And I was super interested to see how he was going to handle this, because Pettis, to me, is really good at dictating range. Leg kicks, body kicks. Now you've got a longer, taller fighter in front of you. How were you going to overcome this? Because I don't think a lot of people, in fairness, gave Pettis an opportunity to win this fight. I certainly did not see it playing out with him winning, much less how he does. And he actually, I didn't see it at first. In full disclosure here, the second round was ending, right? I was looking at my clock, and you're gonna become accustomed to this now. Because this fight, I'm thinking to myself mentally, man, like it's pretty early for a UFC main event. The pacing that the UFC is desperately needed for us East Coasters. It's 11 o'clock and the second round is ending. And all of a sudden, Stephen Thompson goes down in a pile. And I was like, what happened with that? There was a bad camera angle to begin with, by no fault of the UFC. They were in a weird position. Pettis was kind of backed up against the cage. And I don't want to say he exploded off the cage because he was falling back into it, but he literally returns off the cage with a perfect Superman punch, while Thompson is in mid, not even full-blown, kick, but almost like he was just kind of feeling out distance. And it's over. And to that point, I don't know that Herb was ready for this either, because once Thompson went down, he caught it 2 more to the face before Herb could even get in there and stop it, when he would have been stopping the round at that point anyway.
Unbelievable ending to the fight. There was not, in my opinion, when I broke this down, kind of the X's and O's from this, you're right. It's Stephen Thompson's to lose. Bigger, stronger, rangier, versatile, great with his feet. This is his natural weight class. A little bit more power. A fast guy at 170. Now, Pettis might have the speed advantage coming up from 55, but Thompson's a very quick 170. This looked like a Stephen Thompson fight in round 1 and round 2. Controlling distance, using his footwork. Pettis hadn't found his way in, starting to pick him apart, starting to get him bloody, starting to kind of chip away and wear him down, and then bang, it's all over. Anthony Pettis, beautiful Superman punch counter. Looking forward, what that does for me is I see more this more as a gigantic step back for Stephen Thompson than I see it as a gigantic step forward for Anthony Pettis. No disrespect to Pettis, had a great job at 170. I don't see a lot of great matchups for him at 170. I really don't. Not a lot of winnable fights for him. So in the idea of, he can really be a factor 170, I don't know. Number one, the top of the field is crowded with fantastic wrestlers. Really fantastic wrestlers that Pettis is going to have trouble dealing with. So the elite of the elite at 170 is going to be tough for him. The middle range, are there some interesting fights? Yeah, there really are. There's some interesting ones. He stays in that, that mid-level, 5 through 15. There's some excellent strikers that will be entertaining fights for him. Do I see him becoming a contender like Stephen Thompson was? No. So that's the difference for me. Stephen Thompson lost his contender status with this loss, but Anthony Pettis didn't gain contender status with this win. That's why I see it more of a step back. Do I now see Pettis in Stephen Thompson's position where, maybe one or two more and he gets a title shot? No, I really don't. So Stephen Thompson, though, is the outsider looking in to an increasingly stacked and competitive 170-pound division. Big loss for him. Big loss. Pettis, I think Pettis serves better at 55 anyway. This may have just been a bump up to see what he could do. But I don't see a ton of winnable fights against elite fighters for Anthony Pettis. And Stephen Thompson, big step backward. That's my takeaway.
Right. I mean, and it's almost a shame that the story doesn't become about Pettis. It becomes more about Thompson. Because what do you do with Stephen Thompson? Now, first time he's been knocked out, I get it. And I don't want to say that he is not still one of the best strikers in that division. He is. But where do you put him? If he'd won this, right? If he had won, you've got a great example of him going back against Woodley. Sure, you've got the draw, you've got the loss, but now they're in different places. He can catapult that right back into being contender. He just, still has that win over Masvidal. Masvidal's moved up since then, even though he's been, not really active, even looks better. But now, like you said, you've got, and even to Thompson's point, he joked afterwards. He said, how did I get knocked out by a 55er? First time ever. Shouldn't happen. It really does drop his stock a tremendous amount, but puts Pettis in a situation where after the fight, he calls out Gaethje or Barbosa. I'm sorry, I don't think he makes it out of either one of those fights. And that's not saying anything about the caliber of fighter he is. I wasn't getting him out of this fight until he gets this Superman punch, which, to be fair, works 2% of the time, knocks out, maybe 1% of the time?
You couldn't pick this if you tried. If you had given me a million scenarios in this fight of how, if Pettis was going to win and how he was going to win, Superman punch at the end of round 2 in a fight he was losing would not have been on my radar. And when you look at the fighters that have taken on Stephen Thompson, and none of them knocked him out. When you talk about Till and Masvidal, Tyron Woodley twice, Rory McDonald, Johnny Hendricks, these guys can punch through a wall. And he was able to get through all of them without getting knocked out. And he gets knocked out by Pettis. It's absolute craziness. Absolute craziness.
How did you not throw Whitaker in there, by the way?
That's true. Whitaker as well. You know what's funny? The reason I didn't, you almost see Whitaker as 170 Whitaker and 185 Whitaker. You know what I mean?
That's true.
So much more impressive at 185 pounds. Robert Whitaker, a good 170, obviously the greatest 185er in the world right now. So it's so funny. I do tend to break those into different categories. 185-pound Whitaker, I see as a different guy. That dude's an absolute animal. So yeah, throw Robert Whitaker in that mix. None of those guys can knock him out, and Pettis gets it. Craziness. So it's going to be interesting to see where both guys land. But, to be a gatekeeper at 170 is just the worst job in MMA. The worst job in MMA. So that's might be where Thompson is headed, and that sucks because he's a really talented fighter.
So we're going to close this out with a little bit different perspective as far as you've just came over from the Mecca, right? You've came over from the left coast where UFC predominantly bases itself and where a lot of their timing is based. So I mentioned earlier, I'm literally cognitive of what time it is as this fight is ending. 11 o'clock, pretty much on the nose. Stephen Thompson gets knocked out. UFC post-fight show starts at 11:07. Now, to me, I almost would be happier with a shorter card, given what we've seen tonight. I get it. The pacing was there. It was kind of, full decision fights. But let's think about it this way. This event was 7 hours long. I don't know how many people can be really that exciting and that prepared for an event they're going to be at for 7 hours. Even if you have like a modest 30-minute commute to and from, if you're going there, you're devoting like 9 hours in a day to a sporting event. That is twice, if not three times, what most other sporting events offer. And yes, I'm sure people will say, oh, but you get so much more for your money. You're buying this ticket, you're seeing all these fights. But the counterpart of that is, and you know better than me, when you go in to a UFC event, cards one through, fights 1 through 3, there are times the arena can be shockingly empty.
It's always interesting to me as a commentator, which is, my former position with the UFC and Bellator, and keeping your energy level up for, like you said, 7, 8 hours, 9, it is tough, man. Because you're doing pre-fight stuff, you're doing post-fight stuff, and your ability to keep your energy level, because it's separate shows too. You got to remember that. When I was doing those Fight Pass prelims and Fight Pass and then main card, and each one is like you got to get that energy up and keep it up. And the main event, it's a huge knockout. Oh my god, da 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 da. And then it's over, and then it's okay. We're going back to the studio. You stand up, you get your microphone in your hand, and it's, hey, excited again. You should have seen that knockout. Man, you are done at the end. You are absolutely, I'm telling you from a commentator's perspective, keeping the energy level that high for that long, that is tough. That is really tough, man.
Well, in this case, you're selling the next fight that isn't always living up to the expectation, and then you're having to take, from a viewer perspective, you're selling me Curtis Blades, Justin Willis as an example, as this heavyweight contender, top 10 guys. This fight's going to be a rocket ship platform for whoever wins, and I kind of watch this really one-sided drug out fight. Then you're going to sell me Stephen Thompson, elite striker, one of the UFC's best, guy that's fought for title contention against Pettis, real versed, well-rounded, guys went all over the place in terms of weight divisions, going to be fireworks. And then it happens. But at the same time, I'm sitting here having literally sat here for like 6 hours of fights. And I guess the other side of this is, as a longer tenured combat sports fan, this is not what I've always been used to. There were times where, you would watch boxing matches when I was a kid. You wouldn't know, some of the people on the undercard. They would literally be amateur. They would run amateur fights beforehand. So you're sitting there watching the pre-fights to get to the main event, to get to your Tyson fight, if you will. You're not having the full stacked card like we're almost, I don't want to say spoiled with, but let's be honest, we've gotten used to the system UFC provides of your main event is going to either be a contender or a title fight. If we're talking about a pay-per-view, it's generally a title fight. And then beneath that, you're going to have 2-3 fights of ranked opponents fighting each other. And then maybe prior to that, you've got some fights that, they put in to make it exciting. In this case, you get somebody up and coming like Macy. You get somebody that's, looking to put on a show sometimes in terms of firefights like Steven Peterson. But it's almost like, talked about it on the last show, the oversaturation, right? Like you're throwing so much at me. And some of these cards we talked about in the beginning, you try to judge them. Some of these cards, you almost have to judge, is it worth my 10-hour investment to do this? Think about next week. I literally have to sit there and know that I'm going to go sit in an arena for probably 7.5 hours. Name me one other sport where you're going to go and you're going to sit somewhere for 7.5 hours to watch an event.
Pretty crazy. Unless you want to do all day NCAA tournament. If you're an NCAA wrestling fan, you want to sit there all day for the NCAA tournament. That's a full day commitment. Yes. But individual sporting, especially as far as mainstream sports, which the UFC, MMA is certainly becoming, it's the only mainstream sport that requires that kind of commitment by far, by a lot.
The commitment, and as we mentioned in the last one, also the financial commitment, also ironically well-timed. Our last show, we talked about the DAZN. They raised their price now from $9.99 to $19.99. And they did this. Were you aware? Did you
Yes.
see like kind of their little release? They did this And it's so intriguing to think about it, right? So they're looking at, you even said it yourself. We don't know the numbers, right? We're blind to this.
Right.
But they really peeled back the curtain to us. They said, "Look, you have DAZN, right? I'm sure you do.
Yes, I do.
When's the last time you opened it?"
The MVP Paul Daly fight.
Been a while.
Yeah.
Name, I hate to put you on the spot like this. Name one show on DAZN.
The only thing I've watched on DAZN is Bellator. That's it. It's the only thing I've watched on DAZN. I'm gonna probably catch some of their boxing stuff coming up, but it's been pretty much it's my Bellator app, pretty much.
Oof.
Yeah.
That's rough, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. It is.
So they came out with the statement of, they've got basically two core people. They've got the person that buys it for the big fight, never opens it again, very sparingly, or they've got the person that buys it and consumes everything.
Right. Yeah.
So they've came up with the concept that, okay, and to me, you might as well say the heavier handed of the two is the person that buys it just to watch the event, right? No one's living off the entertainment DAZN provides. So they basically come out and say, we're going to raise the price of the monthly service. So it's $20. It's going to be less expensive than a traditional pay-per-view. And then if you want to buy it as a scalable show, we're still going to keep that same lowered cost for the first year. Do you think now, in hindsight, knowing that unlike ESPN Plus, that gives you a wealth of information, unlike Fight Pass, which we all know is still almost required purchase, has also all the background events, do you think this is something that's really going to hurt DAZN so young into where they are with such little of a, I mean, to be fair, we should know, right? This is the new player on the block.
Right.
They should have given us something innovative, new, that we're opening this app once a week to watch. And it's just not there, right?
Yeah, well, the thing is what I'm curious about, because I'm a boxing fan as well, is their boxing coverage. How many MMA fans appreciate the boxing coverage enough for it? That's one question I have, because I really do appreciate boxing. I'm not sure how many MMA fans do. Secondly, it all adds up. I wouldn't say the DAZN deal is necessarily bad. It's just I have to keep 3 streaming services, like you said, Fight Pass, ESPN Plus, and DAZN, to keep up with all of MMA. It starts adding up. People start choosing. And you have to basically factor that into everything. It's not just, is this one deal fair? But if I'm searching for one to get rid of, who is that going to be? If I got to save money at the end of the month, who's that going to be? And to me, DAZN offers Bellator's their MMA offering. They have a lot of boxing stuff coming up. And to me, the success or failure of that, and they're throwing a lot of money at a lot of great boxers, will determine the success of DAZN. Will fight fans pay for the boxing and consider it worth it? That I'm really curious about.
I believe that is probably a topic for another show, my friend. So
You bet.
listen, we are still in the yes. That's a continuation. We will talk about that another time, I promise. And I really do look forward to hearing your take on the proverbial boxing versus MMA discussion, which we kind of did get into here, but we will try to keep this recap of the fight night a little bit shorter. We are still working on a name. We're still working on concepts. So we do appreciate you guys sitting through this, and we will be back very shortly with more commentary.